Today on Israel Hayom Insider, preserving the textual culture of the people of the book. With me in the studio, Dr. Yoel Finkelman. Dr. Finkelman is the curator of the Judaica Collection of the National Library in Jerusalem.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Tell us about the National Library. What is this institution?
The National Library of Israel, which has existed for about 123 years in Jerusalem, is today the single most largest, deepest collection of Judaica-related print material, books, manuscripts, journalism that has ever been collected in the history of the Jewish people.
Okay, it's a government institution?
It is related to the government. We're actually a chevra l'to'elet hatzibur,
like a public
company for the public good, which gains some of its support from the government and some of its support from private philanthropy.
Okay, and what would go into the National Library? Is it like the Library of Congress, like our version of the Library of Congress?
In the sense that every publication, more than 50 copies, if it's published in the State of Israel, in the boundaries of the State of Israel, by law, publishers are required to give us 2 copies. That can range from bestsellers that you find in the bookshop to something that was created for distribution for a private event, even if it's more than 50 copies. And in addition to that, we have
my son's bar mitzvah invitations?
Not your son's bar mitzvah invitation, but if you were to put together a collection of short articles related to your son's bar mitzvah and you distribute it to the 200 guests at the event, then you would have to drop 2 copies in the mail.
Interesting. Okay.
So we collect everything that's published within the State of Israel, and in addition, we have a collection policy that requires us to collect anything published related to Jews and Judaism in any language around the world, from Chinese, Japanese, Taiwanese to English, French, German.
Interesting. Okay. So first of all, who would use the National Library? Is it a lending library at all?
It's not really a lending library primarily. It's primarily a research library. For years already, we have been one of the most central hubs for academic research related to Judaica, Zionism, the State of Israel, Islam in the Middle East. And in addition, we are increasing the amount of readers who come from what we would call the general public, people who are coming to do genealogical research on their great-great-grandparents, students who are working on school projects, undergraduate students who are working on school projects, the general public who find themselves interested in some practice, recipe, event, historical. We have an enormous collection of Jewish-related cookbooks, ranging from Yiddish in the Renaissance period to Russian Jewish cookbooks today.
Okay, the Judaica Collection. It sounds like that's a very major part, maybe the most important part of this library. What goes into Judaica and what doesn't go into the Judaica Collection?
Well, we have a series of people who speak as broad an array of languages as we can find, who peruse catalogs and work with suppliers to find every book related to Jews and Judaism. We do not try to discriminate. If Jews are doing something and they define that as Judaism for themselves, as far as I'm concerned, that is Judaism. And there are certain kind of gray areas when you deal with somebody who comes from a Jewish background and isn't writing things particularly with Jewish content, and then we have to make judgment calls. Right. For the most part, we try to be as liberal and comprehensive as possible within budgetary limits. But anything that's happening in terms of Jewish content, whether written by Jews or non-Jews, or written by Jews for whom Judaism is a significant part of their identity, even if they're writing on topics that are not directly related to Judaism.
Is it all books and printed material, or do you have music,
We have
film?
all kinds of different formats. Obviously, books are the core. We have print journalism. Increasingly, we have collecting online journalism.
Collecting online?
We can talk about that in a second. Okay. But we have an enormous music collection, both digital and in various other formats, including sheet music, manuscripts of music, archives. We have a vast collection, hundreds of personal archives and institutional archives related to major artists, researchers, creative people related to Jews and the Jewish people. To a certain degree, film. We also collect what's called ephemera in library language. That means things that are meant to be thrown out. something like your son's bar mitzvah invitation, and we try to get representative samples of things like that from around the world as well, which can offer
and across the ages, I suppose. Right?
And it's obviously harder to get material the older that it is, but yes, we're aiming for everything from the 7th and 8th century until today.
So how do you decide what you're going to collect and what not? There's so much out there.
We have a very detailed written collection policy, and to some degree my job is very easy, because if it's Jewish print text material and we don't have it, then we want a copy. And if it's within our budget, we're going to make a reasonable effort to get it. And that means if there is a Sidur that came out in Zhytomyr, and we have the 90% of the Sidurim that came out in that city, but we're missing this particular edition, we'll make an effort to get it. So it really, in that sense, makes my job a little bit easier, because I can be less distinctive. Regarding big ticket items, manuscripts, one-of-a-kind items, where often there are budgetary restraints. It's hard for us to compete with private collectors and the like. There we have to be much more discerning. But we still try to get things that are going to be unique within our budget and that can shine important light on historical or intellectual questions related to the Jewish people.
So what would be some examples of some of the jewels in your collection, either the rarest, the oldest, the most interesting to you?
To me, I would say the kind of highlight item, the crown jewel of the collection, is Maimonides' personal handwritten copy of his commentary on the Mishnah, including his changes and emendations as he went along, crossing out a word, changing a word.
Really?
That's probably the crown jewel. But there are all kinds of things in the collection that I've fallen in love with that are less kind of big ticket items. Things like a series of the weekly journals, the weekly professional newspapers of the Guild of Kosher Bakers in New York between the 1930s and the 1950s.
Okay, why would that be of interest?
If you want to understand the culinary and economic history of the Jewish people, the social history of the Jewish people, food history is a big topic today. If you want to understand that, this is a fantastic resource to understand the economics and the social implications of how people were purchasing food. The introduction of Judaism to a capitalist economy in an industrial age, the kashrut industry, and supervising things as being kosher. You have a ton of information in that kind of document, and it's not the kind of thing you're going to find in a typical collection anywhere else. You need somebody who's really trying to gather together everything to get something like that.
If I want to see this information, this material, do I have to come down to the library in Jerusalem? Is it online? Do you have
more and
plans
more
to
of the
digitize
material
it?
is being digitized. We're digitizing more and more each month in manuscripts and in print books, but anything is available to anybody who has a reasonable reason to look at it. Rare items are also available to researchers and to the general public who have a justifiable reason. And if the conditions are right, and if the item is in physical shape that it's capable to be handled, then we make it available to people who have good reason to view it.
Okay, so you've got to balance access with preservation, right? The needs of preservation.
Yeah.
How do you make those
well,
kind of decisions?
we have a world-class restoration lab with a world-class staff of people whose professional focus is on the preservation of rare books and manuscripts.
Is it ever justified for someone to like open up that Rambam, that Maimonides manuscript, or
that obviously has been digitized.
Yeah.
In 95% of the cases.
Yeah. There's no reason to go back to that original.
There's no reason to go back to the original, but there are circumstances where it might be. If somebody's interested in the history of the paper or the way in which the volume is bound, that's not the kind of thing that can be pulled up off a digital screen. And frankly, there is something of the aura of these items in the original, which is which is really hard to capture in any other medium. But again, because of this tension between preservation and accessibility, with these kinds of one-of-a-kind fragile items, we're very cautious about how often they come out.
I'm sure. Okay, the National Library, I understand, has just broken ground on a new campus, a new building. Tell me something about that.
Well, the National Library of Israel is currently located in a beautiful 1960 building on the Givat Ram campus of the Hebrew University. It's a beautiful building, and it was a perfect building for 1960, and it is no longer a perfect building. And we need to move out of the campus in order to create parking, in order to create accessibility to the general public and not just the scholars who are going to find themselves on a university campus. And the government has granted us a prime plot of land in the corner between the Knesset and the Israel Museum and the Bible Lands Museum.
Okay, so that's very close to where you are now.
Very close to where we are now, but critically accessible to the public,
Off
not
campus.
on the campus,
Yep.
off campus with proper parking, with much easier accessibility. And it will have things like an auditorium, it will have the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that's critical to move into the 21st century. And it will enable us to create museum space where we can show rare items, where we can make these items accessible in ways that they can't in a building that currently doesn't have proper museum space.
Yeah, you've really got like a textual museum of Jewish civilization.
And we're working both on a permanent exhibit and on temporary exhibits for the new exhibit space that will enable people to come in and see a kind of textual history of the Jewish people.
That sounds terrific, but when am I going to be able to visit the new library?
We're expecting the building to be completed in 2019, and then we're hoping really to be functional shortly thereafter.
Terrific. Yoel Finkelman, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I want to thank our viewers, of course, for continuing to watch us, to follow us, Facebook and Twitter, etc. Send us your comments, send us your reactions, responses, suggestions for new programs. We'd love to get them, and we will see you next time.